Welcome everyone to the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation's Meet the DM Drug Developers session. Today is July 2nd. I am Dr. Tanya Stevenson, the CEO of MDF, and we are here to welcome Harmony Biosciences today. The MDF mission, Care and a Cure, is to enhance the quality of life of people living with myotonic dystrophy and accelerate research focused on finding treatments and a cure. Our work focuses on support and education, research, and advocacy. A reminder of some of the resources on our website. We have toolkits and publications, including clinical care guidelines and recommendations, virtual support group and Facebook chat opportunities, our calendar of events and activities, as well as our digital academy. They are all hosted on our website. And the Digital Academy includes presentations and videos from our past events, including our conferences. And that is also where today's session will be posted in the next couple of days. Today we are meeting with Harmony Biosciences. It is the first Friday of July. As our series has dictated, the first Friday of every month at 12 o'clock Pacific. We have one more session after this, and that will be on August 6th with Avidity Biosciences. And after that, we have the MDF Annual Conference. So if you would like to register for the Avidity Biosciences, which is our final one, please go to myotonic.org/meet-dm-drug-developers. Similarly, our Ask the Expert series is happening on the third Friday of each month at 12 o'clock Pacific. This month, we will have, on July 16th, DM and the Brain from one of the clinicians at Stanford University. And on August 20th, we will have DM and Anxiety from one of our clinicians who is at the University of Utah. Again, September 10th, 11th, the MDF Annual Conference. If you'd like to sign up for either of these Ask the Expert sessions, you can go to myotonic.org/ask-expert-series. To register for the conference in September, it's myotonic.org/2001-virtual-MDF-annual-conference. Myotonic Dystrophy Awareness. We have declared an International Myotonic Dystrophy Awareness Day for September 15th. You can join the Global Alliance and learn more about how you can get involved to help raise awareness about myotonic dystrophy at myotonic.org/international-DM-day. As mentioned, today's session will be recorded and posted to the Digital Academy. That's myotonic.org/digital-academy. If you have questions about today's presentation or any of the presentations that are posted, please don't hesitate to contact MDF at the phone number here or email us at info@myotonic.org. Okay, about today's presenters. The Harmony Biosciences Patient Advocacy Team includes Director Rachel Radomski and Senior Manager Kelly Wright. As the patient advocacy team, Rachel and Kelly work with patient communities, people living with rare diseases, and caregivers' patient advocacy organizations. The patient advocacy team works to represent the patient perspective across Harmony and develops innovative solutions and programs to meet the dynamic needs of the communities Harmony serves. Rachel and Kelly are honored to live Harmony's core value of keeping patients at the heart of everything they do. Also joining us today is Dr. Jeffrey Dayno. He is the Chief Medical Officer at Harmony Biosciences, a nationally recognized expert in neuroscience. He is currently responsible for leading research, development, and medical and regulatory affairs for Harmony Biosciences. He's a neurologist with 10 years of experience in clinical and academic medicine, serving as principal investigator on numerous clinical trials, followed by over 20 years of experience in leadership roles in the pharmaceutical industry, building and leading clinical, regulatory, and medical affairs teams towards multiple product approvals, with a focus over the last 10 years on drug development for rare diseases. Also with us today is Dr. William Jacobson. He is the Senior Director of Clinical Development at Harmony Biosciences. He is an experienced drug developer and clinical trialist, originally trained as a neuroscientist with almost 30 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry. Dr. Jacobson works on strategic and tactical aspects of drug development, and his current focus is on rare diseases of the central nervous system. Okay, we are now getting ready to meet Harmony Biosciences. If you have questions for the presenters, please use the chat box function of GoToWebinar. Use the drop-down menu to select Send Question to Staff. So in order to get any question you might have during the presentation to the presenters directly, please use the drop-down menu in the chat box and select Send Question to Staff. And that question will get to them directly. For those of you who have submitted questions in advance, the presenters have done everything they can to try to integrate those questions into this presentation. Okay, thank you for joining us, everyone, and welcome Harmony Biosciences.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rachel Radomski, Senior Director of Patient Advocacy at Harmony Biosciences. Let me just say it's such an honor and a privilege to be here with this group today. Tanya, thank you for inviting us to participate. It's actually been a very exciting week at Harmony, and Dr. Dayno and Bill Jacobson will share a little bit more details about this. But I am thrilled to say that as we've been working over the last several years with the myotonic dystrophy community, Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation has been such a wonderful partner to us. And so this is a great day for us. So what we're going to do today is we're going to give you a really brief introduction to Harmony, and then Jeff Dayno will talk about sleep and the role of histamine in sleep-wake stability. Bill Jacobson will then talk a little bit about our Harmony trial in myotonic dystrophy for people living with DM1. And then we're here to take questions from the community and hear from you. So next slide, please. So who are we as Harmony? We are a pharmaceutical company headquartered outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, dedicated to developing and commercializing innovative therapies for patients living with rare neurological disorders who have unmet needs. We were established in 2017 by Paragon Biosciences when we licensed the US rights from our French partner, Bioprojet. And Harmony became a public company in August 2020 with around 160 employees currently working at Harmony. And I think the exciting thing we'll get into today is the bottom right of the screen, where we will share a little bit more details about our myotonic dystrophy phase 2 clinical trial. So our culture at Harmony is incredibly important to everyone, including Kelly and I. And one of the things Tanya shared in our introduction slides is that our core values at Harmony start off with keeping patients at the heart of all we do. And Kelly and I work as a part of the patient advocacy team and work to personify that within the company. So we get to collaborate with wonderful organizations in the rare disease community, in the sleep disorder community, and our work provides support and funding via grants. And then we also work to incorporate the patient voice into all levels of our work at Harmony. And Kelly will talk a little bit more about how we've done that in the myotonic dystrophy community over the last several months. And you can always reach our team. And so we have a public-facing email address, advocacy@harmonybiosciences.com. Again, advocacy@harmonybiosciences.com, where we're happy to chat with you, meet you, and learn a little bit more about who you are and your relationship to the DM community.
And hi, everybody. As Rachel said, listening to patients and their caregivers is critical to us at Harmony as we think about joining a disease community. And so when looking at past efforts to listen to people living with myotonic dystrophy and find shared symptoms in their lives, many not previously recognized in the medical literature, we looked to the Christopher Project, the FDA's Patient-Focused Drug Development Meeting, and a past MDF annual conference session. All of these important meetings and reports pointed to a common theme. Many people living with myotonic dystrophy reported experiencing excessive daytime sleepiness, EDS, fatigue, and/or cognitive dysfunction. Earlier this year, Harmony was honored to host a patient and caregiver advisory board with 6 advisors who shared their daily lives, their struggles, and their fears of living with myotonic dystrophy. Members of the Harmony clinical, medical, and patient advocacy teams were engaged during this 2-day meeting. And during that time, advisors confirmed that while other symptoms of their disease were important, they were not as disruptive to their daily lives as the sleepiness, fatigue, and cognitive dysfunction were. Overall, advisors shared what a significant burden these secondary symptoms are on the health quality of their lives, and that they're not well managed with the current available treatment options. Key insights emerged when looking at these patient-reported experiences. And as you can see from some of the quotes and highlights from each report and meeting, there are several symptomatic themes that are not often as inquired about, but clearly have a profound impact on the lives of people living with myotonic dystrophy and their caregivers. These are the patients, many in their own words from these reports and meetings. The Christopher Project reported that DM1 respondents reported more daytime sleepiness and more impact from fatigue and a harder time staying alert. The MDF conference participant said, "More than anything, I want to recapture the joy of life that can be lost to neuromuscular disease that requires most of my energy to get through the day, leaving little reserve for the things that really matter." A patient that participated in the patient-focused drug development meeting told the FDA, "I hope, beg, and pray for a drug or therapy that will help all the brain-related symptoms that DM1 patients are experiencing." And quite profoundly, one advisor that participated with Harmony this spring summed up his needs by saying, "If I can go to a movie in a wheelchair, that's okay for me as long as I'm able to stay awake during the whole movie." Based on the surveys, meetings, and reports, and our own discussions with patients and advocacy groups, we've heard that there is a strong desire by the myotonic dystrophy community to address these needs through new treatment options, and Harmony is excited at the possibility of contributing positively to the lives of people living with myotonic dystrophy. And now I am happy to turn it over to Dr. Dino.
Thanks, Kelly. And on behalf of the clinical development team at Harmony Biosciences, I'd also would like to thank Tanya for the invitation for this webinar. And I want to thank everyone on the webinar for your time and interest today. We're excited to share with you the work that we've been doing with the myotonic dystrophy community. So I'll provide a quick overview of the role of histamine in sleep-wake state stability, which provides the scientific rationale for the work we're doing with pitolisant and our phase 2 clinical trial in patients with DM1. Next slide. So you all know the difference, between sleep and wakefulness, but it's also important to understand that, sleep serves an important restorative function in our body, and impaired sleep can have significant health, consequences, including cardiovascular issues, effect on blood pressure and heart rate, effects on our immune system, immune dysregulation that can cause heightened states of inflammation, and excessive daytime sleepiness and can also have impact on our cognitive function. So sleep and wakefulness, if we can go back one slide. Sleep and wakefulness are controlled by different systems in our brain, and you see this schematic on the right here, that the major chemicals in the brain that promote wakefulness and actually stabilize states of sleep and wakefulness one is called hypocretin or orexin, and the other is histamine, and they are produced in an area deep in the brain called the hypothalamus. There's another part of the brain that is mainly sleep promoting, the VLPO for non-REM sleep, and not shown on this is another center throughout the brain that promotes REM sleep. Next slide. So there are these chemicals in the brain, as I mentioned, called neurotransmitters that send signals throughout the brain between the nerve cells that are called neurons that mediate our states of sleep and wakefulness. One important neurotransmitter is histamine. It's a major wake-promoting neurotransmitter, and it also serves to stabilize states of sleep and wakefulness. Histamine also works on other neurons and other parts of the brain to promote wakefulness. And it releases these other neurotransmitters. One is norepinephrine, another is dopamine, serotonin, and acetylcholine. And these chemicals are also involved in wakefulness, attention, and cognitive function. Next slide. So what you see on this slide is that there is evidence of decreased hypocretin levels in some patients with type 1 myotonic dystrophy. And you see in this graph, patients have lower levels of hypocretin compared to the controls, as shown by the different levels of the circles on this graph. So in the setting of hypocretin deficiency, histamine becomes sort of a major player with regards to helping to sustain wakefulness and stabilize states of sleep and wakefulness. Next slide. So what this takes us to is, what's most important and is the clinical symptoms. And there was a very important study that was published in 2012 in the journal Neurology. Chad Heatwall, University of Rochester, and others published this study called the PRISM-1 study, or the prevalence and impact of symptoms in DM1. And the key findings showed that there's a high prevalence of the non-muscular symptoms of excessive daytime sleepiness, what's referred to as EDS, fatigue, and cognitive dysfunction. And in fact, the impact factor, or the impact on daily functioning of EDS and fatigue was recorded by patients as being as high, as significant, or higher than some of the muscular symptoms of this disorder that you're living with. So you see in this bar graph on the left side of the slide, problems with hand and arm function that, very common with an impact factor of 2.27. So the impact factor, the higher the impact factor, the more the effect on daily functioning. But then there's fatigue. Up to over 90% of patients reporting fatigue with an impact factor of 2.49, higher than what was reported of problems, with functioning of hands and arms. Myotonia with an impact factor, you see there 2.09, and then impaired sleep, daytime sleepiness. Close to 90% of patients reporting that with a high impact factor of 2.25. So in addition to the very, prominent and important muscular symptoms in myotonic dystrophy, EDS, fatigue, and cognitive function have significant impact on daily functioning. Next slide. So a little bit about pitolisant, what it is and how it works. It's a first-in-class medicine, and it has a novel mechanism of action. It works by increasing histamine levels in the brain. And as I've said before, histamine is a major wake-promoting neurotransmitter that helps to stabilize states of sleep and wakefulness. And in the setting of hypocretin orexin deficiency, with evidence of some patients with DM1 having that, it becomes sort of the main neurotransmitter driving wakefulness. Pitolisant was developed by our French partner, a company called Bioprojet. It's a research-based pharmaceutical company located in Paris. And they did the work and actually got pitolisant approved in Europe, in the EU, the trade name Wakefulness, and that was in 2016. And it was for the treatment of narcolepsy in adults with or without cataplexy. That was the lead program that Bioprojet did the development. We then took the data and worked with the FDA and got approved in the US in August of 2019, first for the treatment of excessive daytime sleepiness in adult patients with narcolepsy, and then in October of last year, got the approval for cataplexy. Cataplexy is a symptom in patients with narcolepsy. It's the sudden loss of muscle tone, either partial or complete, usually due to strong emotions, laughter, fear, anger, but patients remain conscious, but they lose muscle tone, and these events tend to last a couple minutes and then resolve. Importantly, when WAKIX was approved, it was the first and only product approved by the FDA for patients with narcolepsy that is not scheduled as a controlled substance by the DEA. WAKIX pitolisant works differently than traditional stimulants. It works differently than modafinil. And importantly, it is an oral tablet. It's a pill form, and it's taken once daily in the morning upon wakening. Next slide. So lastly, while our initial focus at Harmony with pitolisant was in the realm of narcolepsy and gaining the approvals, now we are very much focused on our work in additional orphan rare neurological disorders, and it's based on this mechanism of action of pitolisant that works at the histamine 3 receptor and increases histamine levels in the brain. And with that, on Tuesday of this week, we were very excited to announce the initiation of our phase 2 clinical trial in patients with type 1 myotonic dystrophy. And to share more about our trial and information on that, Bill Jacobsen will take it from here and provide you some background and further information on this trial. Bill?
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much. I would like to repeat what my colleagues have said and thank the Foundation for the opportunity to present to you our clinical development program. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to be able to do so. I last spoke to this group probably about a year ago, and I was able to discuss the company a little bit and talk in very general terms about our plans, but we had not yet designed our trial, and I'm delighted that I'm able to talk with you about our program, which, as Jeff mentioned, actually initiated this week, and we're extremely excited about it. I'm very pleased to be able to explain to you what it is that we're doing and how we're going about doing it. Next slide, please. So we're undertaking a phase 2 trial, a phase 2 clinical trial. And phase 2 clinical trials are those trials that ask the question, does the treatment work? This is the first time we're actually administering our drug pitolisant to people with the disease in question, in this case, patients with DM1. Our primary objective in doing this is really to learn about the safety and the efficacy of pitolisant, and we're going to be comparing it to placebo, to an inactive drug. From the perspective of looking at the symptom of excessive daytime sleepiness in patients with myotonic dystrophy type 1. The primary endpoint that we're using to assess this is the change in the average sleep latency, and that is the amount of time it takes an individual to fall asleep. This will be done in a sleep laboratory in a special test using a test referred to as the MWT, or Maintenance of Wakefulness test. We're going to look at that at the beginning of the study, prior to exposure to the drug, and after a course of treatment with the drug. Look at it at the end of the study and compare the patients who were on pitolisant to those who were on placebo. The MWT is a type of sleep study that's performed, as I mentioned, in a sleep laboratory, and it's actually a test of wakefulness. What we do is we measure how long an individual can stay awake under controlled circumstances. Next slide, please. So in addition to our primary objective, we also have a number of secondary objectives. As Jeff mentioned, myotonic dystrophy is a multi-systemic disorder which impacts many systems. We're focusing on central nervous system symptoms. We're going to be looking at things that, as Jeff mentioned, are common and have significant impact on patients with myotonic dystrophy type 1, and these include fatigue. We're going to be looking at cognition, at certain elements or domains of cognition, and these are often lumped together and referred to simply as brain fog. So we're going to be measuring things like psychomotor function and speed of processing, how quickly your brain processes information, the ability to pay attention, working memory. In addition to these very specific tests of cognitive function, we're also going to be asking for some subjective assessments. We're going to be asking the clinicians and the patients to assess themselves the severity of sleepiness. And then finally, we're going to be looking at the overall burden of disease using an instrument which actually measures 17 different groups of symptoms. So it's a fairly extensive inventory, but it is heavily weighted to look at things like fatigue and sleepiness. Can I have the next slide, please? So our trial design, this is a study with about 135 patients in total. We're using the gold standard for clinical trials. This is a double-blind, randomly assigned trial. So the patients will not know what treatment they're on. The investigators will not know what treatment they're on. We will not know what treatment they're on until the study is over and we've locked the database and we've unblinded. These patients will be randomly assigned in even numbers to either placebo, an inactive tablet, or a low dose or a high dose of pitolisant. So again, the distribution will be even and it will be random. Next slide, please. So this is the overall scheme of the trial. I'll take you through. Initially, we have a screening period, and this can last up to 45 days because of the amount of time that it takes for us to collect the data. It's not all done at a single time point. We collect information, as I said, over a period of time, and the purpose of this is to determine whether, in fact, the individual is eligible for the trial. We have well-defined criteria that I will explain in a moment. That will determine whether you can enter the trial or not. We're required to define our population and ensure that subjects that enter the study all meet the requirements of it. Once that's done and patients are actually randomized into the study, there will be a 3-week titration. This is where we increase the amount of medication up to, and again, depending on the dose that one is assigned to, up to the high dose, as you can see in the next group, of 35.6 milligrams, or the low dose, or to placebo. So this is done over a 3-week period, and this is in concordance and agreement with our label for narcolepsy. Following the titration period, the 3-week titration period, subjects will enter the double-blind 8-week stable dosing period, where they'll be maintained on the dose to which they have been randomized over an 8-week period. We will have taken measurements before the drug administration began, and then we will repeat these measurements at the end of the 8 weeks of dosing to see if administration of the drug had an effect. Following that, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later on, but following that, patients who are eligible will have the opportunity, should they so desire, to enter an open label extension where all patients will be provided with pitolisant. There will be no placebo. This is open label and patients will know what they're on. And as I mentioned, I'll discuss that a little bit further. Can I have the next slide, please? So what are the requirements to get into the study? As I mentioned, we have fairly strict criteria to ensure that we're developing or we're undertaking the study in a population that is homogeneous and appropriate and has all of the criteria that we need. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those criteria that are necessary for inclusion. And following that, I'll talk a little bit about those criteria which would exclude somebody from participating. So could I have the next one, please? So this is a list of several of the inclusion criteria. I'm not going to go into this in any great detail, but I will tell you that we are undertaking this study, this clinical trial, in adult patients with DM1. So that's patients 18 to 65 years of age. All patients who are going to be screened will be screened with a blood test for genetic confirmation of DM1. Many of the patients will have had this done already, but to ensure consistency, we will ensure that all patients have the appropriate genetic defect in their messenger RNA. As mentioned, we're very interested in looking at excessive daytime sleepiness. So we will be using the Epworth Sleep Scale, which is a questionnaire, a self-administered questionnaire for the propensity to fall asleep under certain circumstances. And we have a minimum requirement of a score of greater than or equal to 12. We're going to be doing this test both at screening and then at baseline. If at baseline, again, the subject has an appropriate Epworth Sleep Scale score of greater than or equal to 12, we will administer the MWT that I mentioned earlier, and the subject will need to have a mean sleep latency of less than or equal to 25 minutes. This is actually a rather conservative baseline. We want to ensure, using both the Epworth and the MWT, that our patients are sleepy and that they have enough room to show improvement should the drug be efficacious. Now, many patients with DM1 who suffer from excessive daytime sleepiness are already using some kind of drug, a wake-promoting agent, to assist them with their sleepiness issue. However, if they are still suffering from excessive daytime sleepiness in spite of being on one of these medications, we are not going to ask them to discontinue. We're going to allow them to continue that and have pitolisant or the placebo as an add-on. The one thing we're asking, though, is that these patients have been on a stable dose, their dose has not changed for 2 months prior to screening, and agree to remain on that same dose throughout the course of the double-blind treatment period. We need patients who are able to walk independently with or without an assistive device. So canes, crutches, braces, etc. are certainly permissible. What we're trying to avoid is patients who are unable to ambulate, whose disease has progressed to that point. So that would be patients that are wheelchair bound or require the use of a scooter constantly. For women of childbearing age and potential, we will ask for the appropriate contraceptive precautions to be taken, and that will be discussed with the investigator at the site. And finally, of course, we need subjects who, in the investigator's opinion, are capable of understanding the requirements of the study, following the protocol, and being compliant with the administration of our study drug as prescribed. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about some of the key exclusion criteria. There are a number of things that can contribute to excessive daytime sleepiness, and we need to ensure that we don't have confounding factors. So we're going to ask subjects to maintain, during the screening period, a sleep diary, simply to ensure that their excessive daytime sleepiness is not due to inadequate sleep at night. Many patients with DM have some form of breathing disorder. It could be obstructive or central sleep apnea or other sleep-related breathing disorders. We're certainly not going to be excluding patients who have these. However, we need to ensure, since a breathing disorder, particularly a sleep-related breathing disorder, can contribute to excessive daytime sleepiness, we need to ensure that if these conditions are present, that they're managed appropriately with a BiPAP or a CPAP or other intervention. So again, as long as it's managed, you will be included. If there's unmanaged sleep-related breathing disorders, we would have to exclude you. We are excluding patients who are actively participating in another study with an investigational drug. They would need to discontinue that at least 28 days prior to enrollment, and for the duration of the double-blind study. Obviously, we don't want any confounding investigational medications. There are certain medications that would interfere with the action of pitolisant, and those would have to be excluded or discontinued. We do recognize that even with the excessive daytime sleepiness, some patients require sleep aids on occasion. We are allowing occasional use of sleep-promoting treatments, sleeping pills basically, but we are excluding regular use, and that means more than twice a week, and we're also excluding use prior to a study visit. And then again, similarly, based on the judgment of the investigator, a patient who is unsuitable for the study for any reason. In addition to these rather specific exclusionary criteria, there are a number of rather standard exclusion criteria that we're using. These are related to severe kidney function disorders, severe hepatic disorders, women who are breastfeeding or planning to breastfeed, since we don't have firm information on the impact of the drug, whether it's actually excluded in breast milk or how it might impact the infant that's being fed. Excessive caffeine intake, we're certainly allowing caffeine intake, but we're trying to limit that so that it's not acting in a stimulating manner. And the use of prohibited medications. And one thing that we always do is look for any element of suicidality. That's just common practice in clinical trials, and that's something that will be assessed regularly. Next slide, please. There is one specific exclusion criteria that I'd like to address and that we receive questions on frequently, and that is considerations about the heart. As you know, the heart is a muscle, and in DM1, the heart is often involved to one extent or another. Many people living with myotonic dystrophy have implanted devices of one sort or another to manage their heart conditions. I want to stress, and this is really important, that many of these devices are actually allowed in the study, particularly if they're designed to prevent significant problems. Certain ones that are there to treat serious heart disease are not allowed, and this is something that will be discussed with the investigator at the investigational site. All of our investigators have close relationships with cardiologists, and in point of fact, most patients who are being followed for muscular dystrophy have cardiovascular assessments on a regular basis. So there are certain serious heart conditions that would not be allowed in the study. We're addressing cardiac safety in two ways. We're addressing it by trying very hard not to enroll patients with overt serious cardiovascular disease. Before being included in the study, subjects will receive a Holter monitor, which is basically a type of portable cardiogram or EKG that records your heart rhythm over a 24-hour period. So you get this at the site, you take this home, you wear it, it's non-invasive. At the end of the 24-hour period, you take it off and a courier will come and pick it up and return it, and it will be assessed, but you continue normal activity while we're doing this. And this gives us a good idea of how your heart is functioning over a prolonged period. EKGs really sample a very short period and may miss certain events that are important for consideration. Next slide, please. So I want to talk to you briefly about some of the procedures and assessments I've referred to earlier, but give you a little bit more detail on them now. Next slide, please. So what is required? Well, total participation in the study, when we look at the entire screening process, which may last up to 45 days, the 3 weeks of titration and the 8 weeks of treatment, and so on, is approximately 4 months. During the course of the study, as I've mentioned, you will participate in some sleep tests. We'll do genetic testing. We'll do some cardiac monitoring. We'll ask you to keep a sleep diary that has 7 days of data in it. Once you actually get into the study, we will ask you to maintain a dosing diary, just recording when you've taken your medication so we can assess compliance, which is very important. There will be a number of questionnaires that will be asked. Some will be self-administered, some will be asked at your visits, and these will be related to an assessment of your symptoms, how you're feeling, and so on. There will be physical exams. We will collect blood samples and urine samples at various times. And again, you know, the expectation is that you'll take the study medication, as Jeff indicated earlier. The medication, it's a small pill, it's easy to swallow. It's taken once daily upon awakening. Next slide, please. So some of the assessments that we're going to be undertaking, I've mentioned the Epworth Sleepiness Scale. The reason we do this is to ensure that a patient is experiencing excessive daytime sleepiness. This is done at both screening and baseline, and again at end of study. I've mentioned the sleep diary. That's very important for us to ensure that your excessive daytime sleepiness is not due to inadequate sleep. I've talked a little bit about the sleep-related breathing disorders. So we would ask you to either download your CPAP if you have one. If you don't have one because you haven't been diagnosed, we will provide you with a home sleep test that's very easy to administer and again will be sent in. The key thing is to ensure that any sleep-related breathing disorders are managed and are not adversely impacting you and contributing to the excessive daytime sleepiness. Next slide, please. So we have a number of study visits. Again, I'm not going to go into this in great detail. There is the screening period where your eligibility for the study will be determined. We will have the baseline visit during which you'll have your sleep test, and if you're eligible, begin to take your study medication and keep the sleep diary. There'll be some interim assessments, physical exams, cardiograms. We'll do the Holter after you've been on the drug for a little while. Again, repeat physical exams and cardiograms. And then at your last visit, it's going to be kind of recapitulation of the initial visit. You'll have an on-site physical exam. We will repeat the sleep test, the cardiogram. And then if you're interested and eligible, we will discuss your entry into and participation in our long-term open label safety study. Next slide, please. So I'm sure most of you are interested in where the study is going to take place. We have sites that we have selected in all of these cities that are indicated here. We have actually initiated a couple of sites there. We're beginning, we don't start our sites up all at the same time, but we will provide you with a place where you can find information on the sites that are closer to you. For those who live remotely from a clinical trial site, we will provide assistance with a concierge service to assist you with travel to a site that is most convenient to you. There will be no cost in this. The travel costs and the arrangements in terms of air transportation, hotels, transportation to the sites, and so on, will all be taken care of with as little for the subjects to do as possible. We want to make this as easy as possible. We are also looking at opening some sites up in Canada. We're in the midst of preparing to file what's called a CTA, a clinical trial application, and we have some sites that we are discussing. So we hope to have these Canadian sites up and running probably at the beginning of the new year of 2022. Next slide, please. So I did mention the open label long-term extension study. It's a policy of Harmony really to try and provide medication to those who have helped us and participate in our study following the actual double-blind clinical trial. Now, this is a legitimate part of the study. I'm not trying to say that it's not. This is very important to us. It allows us to assess long-term safety. It also allows us to assess the durability of response, and so on. So all patients who are eligible and who are interested will have the opportunity to enter into the long-term study and allow us to continue to collect information. Really, that's all that I have to say. There's a lot of information that will be available to you, and I'm going to turn things back over to Kelly, who will let you know where you can get more information and also present the questions that we've received, and we'd be happy to answer them and address them. Kelly?
Thank you, Bill. That was a great overview. We're really excited to share all of that information. As Bill said, we just announced this on Tuesday, so you are some of the first ears to hear it publicly. We are going to go through some questions that came in prior to, and then also some that have come in right now. And to be more conversational, I am going to stop sharing my screen so we're not tiny boxes on your screen. But before I do, if you have any questions about anything that Bill went over today on the clinical trial, please send an email to the email address on the screen. It's clinicaltrials, plural, @harmonybiosciences.com. So again, that's clinicaltrials@harmonybiosciences.com. So I'm going to stop my screen. Make sure. Okay, are we big? Everybody big?
We're big.
Yes, okay. Okay, great. So I think one of the first questions, and I think Bill or Jeff, if you want to answer, is how is our treatment different from others in development?
So, yeah, I think I'll jump in. So I think at a high level, we know there's a lot of important work, being done with, genetic therapies, and an approach to treating myotonic dystrophy. And, with regards to, genetic therapies and the attempt of being a disease modifying agent, the difference with pitolisant is that it's symptomatic treatment. And it is a different approach than disease modifying therapy. But, what's important is that while that research continues and, hopefully some of those treatments eventually being approved and coming to market, we know that, the symptoms we talked about, excessive daytime sleepiness and fatigue and cognitive dysfunction, are very common in patients with DM1, and as I mentioned, have high impact. So our approach, pitolisant, is symptomatic treatment for those conditions. And, we are hopeful that we can demonstrate that effect, as Bill was alluding to, in terms of the phase 2 trial, and then following on in terms of, further development program. So that's sort of the main difference: symptomatic treatment as opposed to the other work being done with a disease modifying approach.
Thank you. And Jeff, also for you, how has COVID impacted our work so far this year?
So we have had some impact from COVID and from the pandemic in some of our other clinical development programs that we started earlier, in terms of, some of the sites not being able to open because of at those institutions, challenges obviously with patients and their families, traveling to the sites. But what we did is we continued those development programs, and we instituted strategies to, provide more flexibility to the trials. So we, consistent with some of the FDA guidance as we were going through the pandemic, allowing telemedicine visits, so virtual visits, so patients didn't have to travel to do the assessments. We also sent out visiting nurses to collect lab work and do ECGs. Bill was referring to important in this phase 2 trial. So we put in strategies to maintain, actually to increase flexibility while maintaining the continuity of the trial, as well as the integrity, of the data that we're collecting. So we've had some experience in our other program, one that we're doing in Prader-Willi syndrome, which is another disorder of hypocretin deficiency where EDS is a prominent symptom. And we are prepared and have those same strategies incorporated into this phase 2 trial for DM1.
Great. We have a lot of questions coming in about the trial. So Rachel, let me ask you, are there going to be any materials that we can share, patient-friendly focused materials that we will be able to share with the myotonic community?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I'm actually really pleased to say that Kelly and the team here at Harmony has been working on some materials that we hope will make the trial a little bit more palatable and understandable to the community. We heard from our advisors that we met with in the spring that sometimes I think clinicaltrials.gov can be overwhelming and intimidating to even me, frankly. And so we actually, coming out of this meeting, we'll be working with Tanya to send out an infographic that shares a lot of the high-level material that Bill shared about our clinical trial and also provides our contact information. We'll also be working on a presentation to put together to the community that we'll deliver at the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation conference in September. But stay tuned because those will be headed your way.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Kelly, I just want to jump in with a quick comment here. So I want to thank Bill. Bill did a wonderful job providing the overview of the phase 2 trial today. But, I've been in drug development for a while, and I think these patient materials that have been developed, collaboration between, Rachel and Kelly and our clinical development team are really, really well done. And I think in all the years I've been in drug development, I think that they provide a lot of great information in a very sort of patient-friendly manner. So I'm excited that we'll be getting that out to the community, and just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. And sneak peek, you saw many of those images today, so those should look familiar when you see them. We have a lot of excitement from Canada about your comment, Bill. Thank you. This is exactly what we need. As far as the sites go, are you able to share if any are open or our timing on those so far in the U.S.?
Sure. In the U.S., we have a site in Atlanta that was opened on Tuesday, and we have a site in Indianapolis that is either open or will be open at the beginning of next week. Those are the first two. We actually have 4 sites that have been working to be our early openers. I believe another one is in Richmond, Virginia, and I'm not certain where the 4th is. But if you, first of all, I agree with what Rachel said about clinicaltrials.gov. It can be a little intimidating. However, it does list a lot of information about the study, and it does list the sites with contact information and whether they're recruiting or not. So that is updated on a continual basis. And in addition, I would second what Kelly mentioned about the email address that goes directly to our clinical operations and advocacy groups, who will respond to every inquiry with information that is not general but is specific, letting you know about where the closest sites are, when we anticipate them being open, and so on. With respect to Canada, again, as I said, we're in early discussions with some of the sites. Canada is a very interesting country, and I'm not saying that because I am from there, but there is a founder population in Quebec based on basically genetics. There is a very high prevalence of DM1 in the province of Quebec in certain areas, and certainly there are excellent centers for study. So we're very, very eager and excited to be working in those sites. And as I said, our expectation is that those sites will be open in early 2020, perhaps a little bit earlier. As I said, we're in the midst of preparing to file a clinical trial application with Health Canada. Obviously, because of COVID, things in general have slowed down a little bit, but we're doing our best, working with a great group to move this forward. And for our Canadian friends, certainly we're looking forward to including you in this trial.
Thank you. And Jeff, we know we had questions prior to it, and then also today addressing the possibility or the thought process of, we're starting with, we're looking at DM1. What does, are there options or opportunities for DM2? Could you share a little bit more on our thinking on that?
Sure, yeah, happy to. I think that, as Kelly said, starting with DM1. So we know that we are looking at, the phase 2 trial as, the initial study to, as Bill alluded to, look for a signal. And then, based on the outcome, this will inform our further thinking in terms of our development program in myotonic dystrophy. We are hopeful that, we can be more inclusive. But a lot of, from the FDA perspective, the patient population, especially in the initial trial, has to be sort of, well defined, and Bill alluded to sort of a homogeneous population, and with the different type of genetic defects, we're starting in DM1. So based on the outcome of the study, and then as we contemplate a larger development program, we hope to be more inclusive and obviously look at patients with DM2. I would say, stay tuned, and we'll share that information with the patient community as we progress.
Thank you. And one more for you, Jeff. You talked about some of the narcolepsy work that led us to continue to look at other diseases that see excessive daytime sleepiness and fatigue and cognitive dysfunction. Can you share a little more about the results that we've seen in our work in narcolepsy?
So basically, the results in narcolepsy, demonstrated that pitolisant, was very effective in improving daytime wakefulness, reducing excessive daytime sleepiness in adult patients with narcolepsy. So that was one of the primary outcomes of one of the pivotal studies. And then in a similar fashion, one of the other pivotal studies demonstrated that it was effective in reducing cataplexy, which is the cardinal symptom of people living with narcolepsy. And pitolisant was very effective in reducing weekly rates of cataplexy. Those were the major findings. Obviously, that development program demonstrated the overall safety and tolerability profile of pitolisant in adult patients with narcolepsy. Some of the common side effects that were on that slide in terms of nausea, anxiety, and headache was also the most common adverse event. But very few people discontinued the clinical trials in narcolepsy because of a side effect, compared to those on placebo. So those were the key findings that led to the approval of WakeX for adult patients living with narcolepsy.
Thank you. I have two more questions, and then I think we can answer. We have a few more we haven't answered, so I would encourage everybody, if your question is not answered, to email clinicaltrials@harmonybiosciences.com for any trial-specific information. And if you want to chat with that, Rachel or me, to email advocacy@harmonybiosciences.com. But Bill, this one's for you. Can people in the same family participate in the trial at the same time?
Absolutely. And I will tell you that, I mentioned that we initiated our study on Tuesday, and we had a patient scheduled to come in. And very much to our surprise and to our delight, I might add, this individual came in for screening, and this individual's mother, who also suffers from the disorder, asked to be included and is in the midst of being screened. So absolutely, there's no prohibition at all on relatives. As a matter of fact, since we know that the disease is genetically transmitted and is prevalent, many individuals in a family may be impacted, and we would be more than happy to include them. There's no reason to exclude them.
Great, thank you. And Rachel, last one for you. How can I prepare in advance for a clinical trial now?
Yeah, I think one of the best ways, and I'd love, for my colleagues on the clinical side to jump in after me, is as we've been talking about, to do some of the research on the patient side. So take a look at the materials that'll be available. Where might be the right fit for you to participate in a clinical trial, learn more about that trial site, and also feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to have a conversation with you via email, hop on a Zoom call, and we can also provide an introduction then to the most appropriate trial site that would work for you to meet the trial site coordinator and get familiarized there. So that would be what I would suggest to start, but I'd love to hear from my colleagues as well.
So the only other thing, I agree with you, Rachel. I think all of this, and I know we're getting close to the end of time, all of this really does stress the fact that, our motto, I'm sitting in our office in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania, and I can see it. Our motto is patients are at the heart of everything that we do. We really are trying to make this a user-friendly experience, to provide as much information as possible, as much assistance as possible, and hopefully to help develop a therapy that will address what is a very definite need and an unmet medical need in this community. So again, I would like to thank everyone for their participation. And the one thing that we haven't seen here that's behind the scenes is our clinical operations group, who are the ones who actually make the trains go on time. They've done a wonderful job, and everything that you've seen is a result of the work that they've done.
Thank you. And that's a great summary, Bill. I think, Tanya, if there's anything else that we need to do, we would love to, thank everybody for your time today. Wish you a wonderful, if you're in the United States, July 4th weekend. But also, really encouraged to reach out. As we've said a few times, those email addresses, we're here to talk with you. We're thrilled to, over the past few years, been involved with the myotonic dystrophy community and continue to do that, particularly now through our trial. So we're here. We'd love to listen and learn and talk with you. So please do reach out with anything.
Thank you all. That was fantastic. It is so exciting to hear what's happening, and it is really, really hopeful. This was an incredibly clear presentation, so easy to understand, and you provided very specific information that is genuinely valued by the community. So thank you for the time and effort that you spent to share this with us today. We're definitely looking forward to learning more and to seeing you all at the conference in September. And as Kelly mentioned and others, if anyone in the audience or who watches the recording has additional questions, please send them to Harmony. And if you have any difficulty reaching them, don't hesitate to reach out to the foundation and we will be happy to forward on any additional questions. Okay, thank you everyone. Have a fabulous, if you're in the US, July 4th weekend. Otherwise, have a wonderful weekend and take care.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.